And my lawyer just called. The papers are all signed. They're about.
She recorded the video herself. No camera crew, no lighting setup, no publicist standing off to the side. Just a phone, a bare face, and the kind of relief that doesn't perform itself. It just exists. The moment Valerie Bertinelli pressed record, she wasn't thinking about how it would land. She was thinking about how long it had taken to get there. "I am officially divorced," she said. "Happily divorced. Oh my gosh, it's finally over." Those words, unscripted, unpolished, raw in the best possible way, traveled across the internet within hours, not because they were shocking, but because tens of millions of people recognized exactly what that relief sounded like, and most of them had never been allowed to say it out loud themselves. This is the story of what happens when a woman stops protecting a version of herself that was never really hers to begin with. It is not a simple story of a bad marriage or a bitter divorce. It is something far more layered, a story about the quiet collapse that happens inside a person long before any document gets signed, long before any lawyer places a call. It is about the habits we build to survive, the roles we agree to play, and the slow, terrifying, necessary act of choosing something different. Valerie Bertinelli had spent most of her adult life being loved by the public. She was the girl next door on One Day at a Time, then the celebrity cook who made Sunday dinners feel warm and approachable, then the woman who seemed to handle everything: divorce, grief, weight, time, with an easy smile and a perfectly timed joke. But behind that image was something she rarely allowed to surface. A woman who had learned very early that being loved meant making yourself palatable, agreeable, small enough to fit into whatever space someone else had decided you should occupy. Her second marriage to financial analyst Tom Vitale began in 2011. By most external measures, it appeared to be the steadier chapter after the turbulent years with rock legend Eddie Van Halen. Vitale was not a public figure. He wasn't a performer or someone who lived inside the chaos of the entertainment industry. Their life together, at least on the surface, looked like exactly what stability was supposed to look like. But surfaces have always been Bertinelli's most complicated terrain. By 2016, something had shifted, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in the way that things shift when two people gradually stop reaching toward each other and neither one says anything about it. Bertinelli described it later in her memoir, Enough Already, as a fading. Not a fight, not a betrayal, a slow withdrawal of the emotional warmth that had once made their connection feel real. They continued appearing together publicly. They maintained the architecture of a marriage. But inside that architecture, the rooms had gone quiet. She did what she had always done when the emotional ground beneath her started to feel unstable. She ate, she drank, not out of indulgence or carelessness, but out of necessity, the kind that builds itself quietly over years until a glass of wine at the end of the day becomes the only thing that makes the silence tolerable. Bertinelli has never shied away from this part of her story. She wrote about it honestly and talked about it openly. She used food as a self-soothing mechanism, filling the space where connection should have been, and used alcohol to smooth over feelings she wasn't ready to name. "We became unkind to each other," she wrote in her book. "Sometimes I said things I wasn't proud of. Sometimes he said things too. We weren't our best selves when we were together." It is one of the most honest sentences she ever committed to paper. Not pointing a finger, not crafting a narrative of victimhood, but acknowledging with clear-eyed honesty that a marriage can fall apart without anyone being a villain. Sometimes the damage is done by ordinary accumulation. Too many silences, too many small moments of not being heard, too many days of performing a version of yourself you no longer believe in. The formal separation began in December 2019, though neither of them announced it at the time. The world didn't learn about it until nearly 2 years later, on November 24, 2021, when Bertinelli filed for legal separation in Los Angeles County Superior Court. The filing cited irreconcilable differences. 6 months after that, the separation was upgraded to a full divorce. The legal language was clean and final. The emotional reality was considerably more complicated. Vitale did not accept the terms quietly. He moved to challenge the prenuptial agreement the couple had signed before their 2011 wedding, requesting the court declare it invalid. He also sought monthly spousal support of up to $50,000, along with $200,000 in legal fees. Bertinelli contested both demands and asked the court to uphold the original agreement. The dispute moved through the legal system until September 2022, when both sides agreed to resolve their differences through a private judge. According to multiple sources, Bertinelli agreed to pay Vitali up to $2.2 million to bring the matter to a final close. There were no press conferences, no public statements from either party's legal team, no dramatic revelations timed to news cycles. The settlement was quiet, as these things often are when the emotional exhaustion of a long legal process finally outweighs the desire to keep fighting. But Bertinelli's silence during the proceedings made what came afterward all the more striking. On November 22, 2022, the day the divorce was finalized, she posted a video from what appeared to be her car. Her face was bare of makeup, her hair was pulled back, her hands were steady, and her expression carried something that was unmistakably relief, not the performative "look how well I'm doing" relief that celebrities sometimes manufacture for public consumption, but the real kind. The kind that comes after a long and genuine ordeal. The video went viral not because it was scandalous, but because it was real. Hundreds of thousands of people shared it. The comment sections filled with women who recognized themselves in her words. Women who had spent years in relationships that felt like endurance tests. Women who had smiled through the photos and kept the peace and told themselves it was fine, it was manageable, it wasn't that bad. Bertinelli, without intending to, had created a cultural moment, a public figure giving herself permission to feel relief, out loud, without apology. She followed the video with action. She auctioned her wedding ring and the Jimmy Choo shoes she had worn on her 2011 wedding day through a luxury second-hand platform. For some, the gesture seemed too public. For others, it was the most logical thing in the world. A material severance to accompany the legal one, a way of making the break complete in every possible dimension. In February 2024, she posted a short video with no preamble and no explanation, just a caption, "I'm over it, I'm over the narcissist, I've been over it for a long time." She didn't name anyone. She didn't need to. Her audience understood immediately what the post meant and who it was about. What is remarkable about the way Bertinelli handled the aftermath of her divorce is that she never turned it into a campaign against Tom Vitali. In an April 2024 interview on Drew Barrymore's show, she said something that stopped many people mid-scroll. "I can't blame my ex-husband for the toxic marriage. What led me to that relationship was unresolved trauma from my childhood." It is the kind of statement that takes years of therapy to arrive at. Not because it is easy to say, but because it requires you to look at yourself with the same scrutiny you've been directing at someone else. The childhood she was describing had its own particular weight. Her family relocated repeatedly throughout her early years because of her father's work, leaving her without the sense of rootedness that most children take for granted. She grew up always on the edge of belonging, always adjusting, never entirely certain the ground beneath her was stable. The loss that cast the longest shadow was the death of her older brother Mark, who died at 17 months, before Valerie was born. She never met him. But his absence was present throughout her childhood, an invisible grief that shaped the emotional atmosphere of the family without ever being fully addressed. Emotions were not processed openly. They were absorbed, carried quietly, stored away for decades. These patterns don't announce themselves when you're a child. They appear later in the decisions you make about who you love and how long you stay. They appear in the reflexive impulse to please, to smooth over friction, to hold a marriage together through sheer force of accommodation rather than genuine connection. Bertinelli told a podcast in 2023 that she had never understood, until she went deep into therapy, why she had stayed as long as she did in a relationship that was causing her pain. The answer, she said, was simple and painful. She had been trying to fill the emotional gaps of her childhood by making herself indispensable to others. The death of Eddie Van Halen in October 2020 became an unexpected accelerant to this process of self-examination. Though they had been divorced for years, Bertinelli and her first husband had maintained a genuine friendship, sustained in large part by their son Wolfgang. She was at Eddie's bedside when he died. In the weeks that followed, she began writing what would become Enough Already, not as a career project or a calculated memoir timed to a promotional cycle, but as a form of survival. Writing became the tool through which she finally allowed herself to look directly at everything she had spent years circling around. The loss cracked something open in her that she had been keeping sealed for a very long time. In the years since the divorce was finalized, Bertinelli's transformation has been deliberate and visible. In January 2023, she took on a month without alcohol. What she expected to be a temporary exercise revealed something more lasting. She no longer needed the numbness. In a reflection video the following month, she said that she hadn't realized how much she had relied on alcohol as an emotional buffer until she stopped and felt what was underneath. Without it, she was more present, in her work, in her relationships, in her own body. The emotional avoidance that had characterized so much of her adult life was gradually losing its grip. Her 2024 book Indulge looked like a cookbook on the surface, but woven through its recipes was a reckoning with her relationship to food, not as a source of shame or an obstacle to overcome, but as a language she had used to communicate with herself throughout her life. She wrote about cooking as a form of emotional archaeology, tracing back through memory to find the moments where the habits had formed and what they had been protecting. She also stepped back from television work that no longer aligned with who she was becoming, stepping down from Kids Baking Championship in early 2024 and turning towards slower, more personal projects. In late 2023, she began seeing writer Mike Goodnaw, 10 years younger than her, someone she met through social media. The relationship lasted approximately 10 months before ending respectfully. In an early 2025 interview, she reflected on it not with regret, but with clarity. The important thing is not to keep someone, but to learn from the way you love. That sentence has been quoted widely, which is not surprising. It is the kind of sentence that takes a long time to mean. In March 2025, she posted an unedited photograph of herself in gym clothes, no filter, and no softening. The caption read, "This is my body at 64, imperfect, unguarded, but proud." On November 22, 2024, exactly 2 years after the divorce was finalized, she wrote on Instagram, "2 years of freedom. 2 years of overcoming self-doubt, 2 years of knowing that I didn't deserve the unbearable." The post drew thousands of comments, not from fans performing admiration, but from people who needed to say it out loud to someone, that they too had stayed too long, that they too had confused endurance with love, and that they too were still learning what it felt like to finally stop. Valerie Bertinelli didn't just walk away from a marriage. She walked away from a version of herself that had been carefully constructed over decades to absorb pain, deflect conflict, and make others comfortable at her own expense. The divorce from Tom Vitale was the legal event. The real separation had been happening quietly, internally, for years before that. In therapy rooms, in late-night writing sessions, in the slow accumulation of moments where she finally heard her own voice clearly enough to trust it. She is not finished. She would be the first to tell you that. But she is genuinely different from the woman who spent years holding a marriage together with the same determined, exhausted hands that had spent a lifetime holding everything else. That difference didn't come from a settlement figure or a viral video. It came from the long, unglamorous, necessary work of deciding that what you feel matters, that what you've endured is real, and that beginning again is not the same thing as failing.